Yes, it is.
Cool.
Let's start. All right, everyone. Welcome to yet another session. And this time we've got a shortened agenda because we were planning to actually have this in person, but obviously we cannot. But let's kick it off with what's up Azure, where Phil and I will quickly run through what happened during last month. It's not going to be a full round this time because we had too many things happening in Azure. And then straight away we'll hand over to Atul to weave his wand and show us some magic. Starting with the DevOps updates, we had bicep ordered for. I think everyone's jumped onto the bicep wagon now, and there were some updates, but not spectacular updates that came as a part of bicep ordered for. I think the linter came along, but apart from that, it's just mundane updates. And finally, Terraform just released 1.0. Something that I never really thought would happen this year on, but then here we are with 1.0. Apart from the main releases in Azure DevOps land, nothing in the last 6 months, apart from the crypto mining, apart from the update that they did to block people from crypto mining on Azure DevOps. There hasn't been any updates, anything that's notable. And from the GitHub and GitHub Actions land, the notable updates that are coming this quarter is more protection onto the branches, where you can actually now link environments to branches. So the arbitrary the arbitrary use of environment variables have been now stopped or will be stopped very soon in GitHub Actions, along with the manual approvals for production scenarios that we've been always wanting to have in there.
Do you know? Can you still redo stages, Venura, or is that still coming?
I think it's already there. Atul was
Right.
doing a little bit more, so we can get to whether the stages worked. Yes, I can
You
confirm.
did?
I
Okay.
did test something recently.
Because that was one of the big things holding it back, right? The fact that you couldn't redo stages and the fact that the manual approvals
Correct.
weren't there was one of the reasons why we couldn't really deploy it properly in production environments.
And the governance gates, the approvals, which is
Correct.
so with those two, I think it'll become much more production ready, and there'll be lots of additional use cases that you can bring in as a part of it. Yeah, let's try and finish these ones because we're running out of time if we keep on. AKS also saw a bunch of updates last month with Ignite, obviously 1.21 support in preview, and then containerd running Windows containers. I'm not sure who's using it, but well, you have Windows containers running on AKS now. And the key thing is they've got this theme of regulated industry support for AKS. As a part of it, they've done a few things. The baseline regulated architecture, the CIS, and now they've got Azure RBAC roles appearing as objects inside AKS. So that'll actually give a lot more mileage when we go and mainly for highly regulated enterprise scenarios. That's going to be a plus when it comes to pushing AKS forward. Moving on with the app services. App services obviously got the logic apps with the single tenant support. So previously, I think even last May, we were looking at solutions that needed an Azure Data Factory and a logic app. Now, pretty much it's a logic app, but the underneath runtime is going to be function apps and obviously running on app services, which opens up a lot of scenarios, because earlier, if you had to connect on premises, you needed to have a data factory that had an integration runtime that was running on VMs that was connecting through Express Route. So all those complex scenarios are now completely taken off, because logic apps will now run on app services, and all the bells and whistles of app services immediately become available on logic apps. as well as the stateful workflow support, because you're now running multiple workflows on the same app service plan. You can either do stateless or stateful, depending on what your taste is. And on the other updates, you've got the static web apps going generally available. Again, it's generally enabling hosting static web applications, but with the bells and whistles of app services. And then a few more updates onto the managed certificates, where you can even now have managed private keys in there. Storage, there were two key updates. One was the GA of key rotation and key expiry. And the other one was to completely prevent that from happening is to use Azure AAD. So they've tried to tighten the security on storage accounts and provide more options if you're using storage in again, enterprise scenarios. So these are generally more valid for enterprise scenarios, and obviously organizations looking for more security. Cosmos, of course, got a few mundane updates, nothing spectacular, but they've got a serverless tier now with the free tier, and RBAC also coming into Cosmos, Azure RBAC being available inside Cosmos. The special one, before I hand over to Phil, Azure Arc. So now you can actually run Event Grid on Kubernetes with Azure Arc. And also you can run app services. These are pretty unique use cases, but it's interesting. So if I look at the PowerShell support in durable functions, the funny use case that you can look at is you can actually run VMware on a bare metal server that actually runs your Kubernetes cluster, which is Arc enabled, which allows you to run app services. And if you really want to, you can run Azure Functions on app services, along with durable functions using PowerShell. So it's actually allowing you to do so many things, but it's also just adding too many complexities as a part of that flow. Again, do not ever use that flow. It's just me making things up. And that's probably one of the horrific things if you're going to do that architecture. Moving on. I think I've got a repeat of the same thing. And then the other key thing that popped out on the web function apps land is that now application insights can pick up Java related logging without having to do any integration, any configuration changes. It just picks up all that data into Azure Monitor. So if you've got your Java application, you can just quickly pop it on Linux web apps, Linux app services, and off you go. You don't need to do a lot of changes to move your Java application onto Azure now. Last but not least, the general availability of VNet peering support for Bastion. Now you don't need Bastion for every application. You just need one Bastion, and you can just connect to anything that's peered onto that virtual network, which is going to be a massive cost saving for most of the places where you have multiple VNets running, which needs access. And with that, Phil, you can take over with your stuff.
Cool, thanks, mate. You had to do the clicky.
Yeah,
because you're on the slides. So yeah, I'll just go a couple of the interesting things that happened in the Azure ML land. So I think, did we skip a slide?
Yes, we did. Sorry.
Yeah. So the first one was the general availability of Video Analyzer. So they brought a lot of new capabilities inside, especially around things like identifying objects and even things like distances and people, all in kind of that plug and play automated video analytics stream. So I'll be quite keen to play around with this at some point and see what it does. But the demos are definitely exciting on that. Next one is the form recognizer going GA. So there's a whole bunch of new functions that have come into form recognize. It was pretty rudimentary when I play with it the last time, but now they've put a whole stack of other functions in there that I can pick up things like ID cards and other values, and also more languages coming into it, which is quite exciting. Then we've got the Q&A feature with the new releases onto that. So a while back, before you had, when you wanted to use Azure, the question and answering, where you had to structure all your questions and answers in a CSV file, upload that, and the Azure, when you asked a question, it generally went through and looked at the question bank to select the answer. Now it's got the ability to just throw in a whole block of text in there, and it can actually, you can query the text, and it understands the text and can answer you questions out of that, rather than having just a whole bank of questions and answers. So you can throw you can throw a blob of text describing something, and it'll answer your question. It can give you answers based on that, which I think is pretty cool. The document translators come in. Again, you can pull a whole document in there and get a translation out. It recognizes the document, it recognizes the sections in the document, and it does a whole pass instead of what you had to do earlier with the translator of having to actually extract the text separately and then pass it into a translate API, pull it out, and then restructure the document. So this is quite exciting. And finally, spot machines are available on Databricks. So if you're playing around with Databricks and you don't want to spend a lot of money on it, you can start bidding on machines with spot pricing. And if you've got workloads that aren't necessarily time critical, you can use spot in there to save a lot of money.
I think it's more POC saving, isn't it? If you're playing around with Databricks, this will be a massive saving.
Yeah, POC, and I think even if you've got like loads that aren't necessarily time critical, like you want to get it done sometime tomorrow or over the weekend or something like that, you could probably put spot pricing in there.
Correct.
Because I think AWS had that for a while, and I think Spot's just coming in properly into the Azure ecosystem. So it's nice to see actually coming in in the ML space. Ooh. And I think we're right on time at 6:15 for Atul. Take it away, mate.
Yeah, all yours, Atul.
Sure, man. I'll just share my slide. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, I can see your browser.
Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'll get straight into this. Today's talk is around Azure governance and doing end-to-end automation with policies. Just a quick intro on myself. I'm Atul Kirpalani. I'm a technical principal at Contino. And in particular, I focus more on app dev on Azure platform. I've been now consulting for over 10 years. And more recently, I've been working on Azure governance, building cloud-native controls to ensure that the platform is fully secured and compliant. So that's the result. That's the reason why this talk is happening today. I'll quickly walk through the agenda. We're going to talk about a bit of an intro I'll give on Contino, where I am at the moment. A bit about Azure policy. I'll explain what are the key components that constitutes the policy. A bit about the management group, and that's more from the hierarchy perspective of how you should be organizing your policies at scale within your environments. And then pretty much a demo thereafter, where I'm going to talk more around, I've got Azure DevOps here, but I've now switched to GitHub Action. Sorry for that. So I'm going to be using GitHub Action and Terraform to deploy our policies into the environment, and then run some E2E tests using Behave, which is a module that allows running test cases, which are like natural language test cases written in Gherkin and backed by Python. We're going to talk a little bit about exclusions and remediations when it comes to policies. And then finally, I'll open it up for questions that you might have. About Contino, I would like to tell you a few things about it. We are a technology consulting company with a strong pedigree in digital transformation. and cloud enablement with some of the world's most recognized companies and brands, as you can see on the slide. We help our customers with measurable transformation through the adoption of enterprise DevOps, cloud native computing, and data platforms. And currently, we have over 350 people at Contino, and we are hiring we are increasing at an exponential rate. So if any one of you all are keen, please feel free to have a chat with one of us post the meetup. That's about it. Straight into Azure policy. Azure policy is pretty much a real-time violation-based engine that's been provided by Azure. And when we deploy things, it's going to get checked as part of the Azure Resource Manager. So it basically gives us that on-demand compliance check / enforcement. And it doesn't really matter how you deploy your resources, whether you do it through a pipeline, whether you use CLI, whether you use Terraform or any other mechanism. The policy engine kicks in and does the checks based on the guardrails that you've kind of set up within your environment through controls. So I'm going to focus on 4 important pieces of that constitutes Azure policy. And I'll do that by getting straight into the code. So I'm going to show you one of the example policies here. As you can see that we have a few sections under the policy. It's nothing but a JSON document. We've got the display name and the description of the policy, which kind of dictates what the policy is all about. We have this mode, which is pretty much evaluation on resource groups, subscriptions, and resource types, which is when you set it to all. Or you could set it to indexed, which basically means you only evaluate resources of types that supports tags and locations. So that's the mode property. Parameters, if your policy requires any injection of parameters based on either environment, you might want to have like your forward proxy IPs for a given firewall rule for non-prod and a separate set of IPs that you want to allow for your production environment, then you should be able to inject parameters to do so. The main part of the policy document is the policy rule. The policy rule pretty much is nothing more than an if and then condition. And you can have all sorts of fields that you want to kind of govern within your Azure resource. So in this case, I'm trying to just govern the type being, all types within the front door resource provider or within the network resource provider for application gateway. So that's your if condition. So if it matches the condition, then it's going to apply the effect. Now, the effect can be of many types. It can either be an audit only, where you just mark things as compliant or non-compliant. They can be enforcement, whereby you can deny deployment of a given resource if it doesn't meet your control objective. And you could have things like append and modify, where, for instance, you might want to ensure that you have a cost center tag on your resource group when someone creates one, and you are able to then, instead of denying the deployment, append the required parameters as per your requirements. And then there is another one, which is deploy if not exist, which allows you to do auto remediation. So for instance, things like, you want to ensure that within your landscape, when, your application teams are going to deploy.
Atul, is it possible to zoom in a little bit?
Is it still too small?
It's okay for me, but there's a comment that some of the guys can't see it properly. Just
Sure.
tad a bit. Yeah, that's fine.
Sure. Yeah, so in that case, if you do deploy if not exist, you kind of ensure things like you want to make sure that all your diagnostics logs are being forwarded to your SIEM solution, and you could do that by ensuring that you do a deployment straight after the instance has been deployed, and thereby you do an auto remediation and ensure that you don't miss out on any of the diagnostic logs that you want to capture. Could be a requirement from your security team. So that's pretty much the policy structure. I now want to go straight into I want to talk about the management groups and quickly just show you within the portal. Is that okay?
Yeah, looks fine.
Sure. So within the portal, you have the Azure and you are able to see all the initiatives that you create. Initiative is nothing but a grouping mechanism. For instance, you have this initiative here, which is all your platform controls. And within the initiative, you can have one or more policies, which can pretty much do different objectives. So I like to group them into initiatives based on the services that you deploy. So for example, you might have an initiative for storage account, the way you want them to be consumed. You might have 10 policies. Could be a policy to ensure that there is no public facing storage account. So you want to deny such deployments. You might have a control where you want to ensure that the protocol is set to HTTPS only, and so on. So you could have multiple controls created for each of the service, and I like to group them in a way where it's part of an initiative. Uh, the other thing about management groups, and the reason I mentioned that is because if depending upon how your landing zone is set up, whether you have an hub and spoke model and you have multiple subscriptions within your Azure environment, be it production or non-prod within the same tenant, then you would like to create multiple management groups, and then pretty much kind of apply your policies at the management group level. So in this instance, I don't have it, but I might be able to create multiple management groups and ensure I have my production subscriptions within one management group, apply my controls to that particular management group. Once it's tested in non-prod, then you want to progress your controls into production environment. So that's one of the reasons why support for management groups for policies is pretty good. I'll now go straight into the code again, and I'll show you what today's demo is all about. I have created a pipeline within GitHub Actions, and I have a few steps here that I would like to show. What we're going to do is, as part of our CI/CD pipeline, we're going to do certain steps, and I'll just quickly show you what the steps are. We're going to check out our source code. I want to make sure I have Python because I'm kind of using some of the Python modules to do some interpolation. I then install all the dependencies that I need, which is pretty much the ones that allow me to do the interpolation. I then log into the Azure CLI, Azure module, and then I run Terraform pretty much, which does the policy deployment. Once that's done, once we have all our controls deployed to our environment, we will then deploy some resources for our end-to-end test. So this allows me to then validate the controls that I have created, whether they do exactly what they're supposed to do. We've seen in an environment, when you apply policies at platform level, in other words, at the management group, you kind of want to make sure that you don't create issues for application teams that have their workload deployed. For instance, if you deploy a deny control and the control fails, the default action by policy engine is to deny control deployment of that resource type. So you want to make sure that your policy does exactly. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of operation requests, support requests. So once I deploy my E2E infrastructure, my test cases, I then run a compliance check on the scope, in this instance being the resource group where I'm going to deploy my E2E infrastructure. I then force the evaluation of that. Now, this can take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes. This is something that Azure accepts the request, and behind the scenes, it's evaluating through policy engine all the controls that we've deployed. Once that's done, I'm then going to be running some E2E tests. These are written in Gherkin feature files, and I use behave as the Python module to be able to run those test cases. Once that's done, I then destroy the E2E infrastructure because we don't want to pay for what we're not using anymore. So that's pretty much the pipeline walkthrough. Let's go back into the code. At any point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. I want to make sure that I don't go too far. So I'll just quickly show you that pipeline over here one more time in GitHub Actions how I've configured. In this instance, I'm set the trigger to be on the branch, on the development branch. If there is any push that comes to the branch, this is going to kick off the branch, the pipeline. I then get this is running on the Ubuntu latest image. I've kind of marked the Python version to be 3.7 in this instance. This is where I'm specifying the dependencies that I want to install for my script to be able to generate some policies. And then I do a login via the Azure module. I've got my secrets for the Azure credentials within the settings of my repository. I then run the Terraform, which is the script which does the policy deployment, and I'll show you that in a minute. And pretty much the E2E infrastructure code, which is another script that runs Terraform as well. This is just an AZ command to trigger on-demand scan on my scope, which is a resource group. I'm then going to pip install all my dependencies that I need for running my behave test. And I'm just invoking behavior as part of that. I then do the destroy as part of my E2E deployment. And I pass the destroy command to my Terraform. So that's pretty much it from the pipeline perspective. The way I've structured the policies, I've got a couple of folders here. These folders in my representation are initiatives. So I could have multiple folders, in other words, multiple initiatives. And under each folder, I've got controls. These are those JSON documents that I talk about, which are the Azure policies. You notice that I have this thing, I'm using a Jinja file over here, which is nothing but allowing me to do some string interpolation and generate a JSON document for this control. So this control is about ensuring that we only allow some restricted locations for our application teams to deploy their resources into. You might have different set of values for your non-prod versus your production for some reasons. So the way I've done that is I've got a YAML file as parameters. In my dev, I've got allowed locations to be Australia East and Southeast. And in test, I've got 4 locations. So that's the difference. So what this file does is takes that parameter value and pretty much does the interpolation here. So when we deploy our policies, I'm also ensuring that I generate for all J2 files that we have in our repository, we generate the JSON file. So we end up in a policy, so we are able to then generate those policies dynamically. So pretty much that is the structure. I then have my infrastructure code, which I'll show you, which is the Terraform modules. So I've created a module over here, which kind of does the policy definition deployment. And if I can show you that, it's, sorry, just give me 1 second. Yeah. So pretty much what I'm passing here is the policy name, display name, description, and all that is coming from the JSON file that I'm reading and passing through. So if you look at the local data, all I'm doing is I'm reading all the JSON files that I have. I'm putting that in a list, in a map, and pretty much we are iterating through that map to ensure we deploy all those policies. Now, one interesting thing here, sorry. Everything. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that's the policy definition. This is where we inject the JSON encoded policy rule that we've read from our JSON file, and we set the parameters. So we pass in all that. We make sure that we've deployed our policy definitions. Once the policy definitions are deployed, we then deploy the policy set. This is the initiative. So Microsoft kind of uses the word initiative and policy set, kind of in multiple places in different ways, but they're pretty much the same. And over here, I'm generating the policy, all the policies that we've deployed. I'm kind of generating, dynamically generating these blocks of policy definitions. So I'm kind of building all the policy definitions into my policy set. And that's the resource that I deploy through policy set definition. Once that's done, then we do the assignment. And in this case, I'm doing the assignment on my subscription, but you could pass another value here, which is the management group ID, and you can provide the management group on which you want to apply your assignment. So in some scenarios, what I've ended up doing is I've kind of deployed all the policies on the tenant root level that sits way above your directory, underneath your directory. And then pretty much all the definitions can be under one management group. And then you might have multiple management groups within your non-prod environment. And you could do the assignment of that initiative at different levels underneath that. What that helps with is the limitation. Within Azure, there's a limitation of around 500 custom policies that you can have within your environment. So you want to make sure that you kind of use that wisely. So rather than duplicating and following the dry principle, you kind of deploy that policy once, and then you are able to assign that multiple times on your child management groups or any other subscription for that matter. One thing I have used here, which is the enforcement mode. Now, with the enforcement mode, what happens is when you deploy policies, I said there are multiple effects that you can apply. One of the effect being deny. And what that does is in your dev environment, when you are deploying the policy and you're trying to deploy some compliant and non-compliant resources, it kind of blocks you from doing that because the deny policy kicks in and you can't deploy any non-compliant resources. But for me to do my testing in my sandpit, I want to make sure that I turn the enforcement mode to off. So I'm kind of saying here, if my environment is dev, I don't want to enforce the policy. In other words, continue to audit, but don't deny deployment of any resources. So this helps with the testing of my controls. And then once you've tested your controls in your dev environment, when you do your test or your pre-prod environments, you want to make sure that that's turned on. So that helps you to kind of test your policies ahead of time. And that's pretty much the policy assignment. And over here, I'm specifying the policy set definition ID as the initiative that I'm assigning, creating an assignment for. So that's my modules. I have created the structure here, and over here you are able to see that I'm kind of deploying just the first folder. So as you saw that I've got multiple control folders. So in this case, I'm just deploying the platform controls, but I've got storage as well. So I could very easily now pretty much just sorry, just give me 1 second. I could pretty much just allow this section to come in and do a deployment, and that's going to deploy the second set of initiative as well. So you could pretty much now just keep adding the folder structure that I have here, add the controls. You don't need to worry about the infrastructure code. The only thing that you do is you kind of add a module per folder that you want to, right? So you add this section for each of the folders that you want to deploy in your environment. So that's the policies. I will now quickly show you the policies E2E. And this, as I said, is using Gherkin. Gherkin is basically allows you to define your test cases in a natural, human-readable way. So you could have collaboration between your security architect, who pretty much knows what the requirements are, but doesn't quite understand how to do it. So they could be writing these files for you, where they define, like, I've deployed a storage account, and I've deployed it in a given location. In this case, it's going to take two test cases. The first test case is going to pass Australia Southeast, and the second one is going to pass West US. And I'm saying that if that is the case, then the policy inside should tell me that my resource is compliant because it's deployed in Australia Southeast, and it's non-compliant due to the fact that it's not in an approved region. So this is where I pass the policy ID. So this is pretty much the code that remains as is for all the test cases that I would be writing. The only thing that I need to make sure that I write code for is the given and the when. So I'll quickly show you how that looks in Behave. So over here, I'm using the Azure Python SDK, and I've kind of used the resource graph to query the resources that I've deployed in my E2E resource group. So I'm kind of running a query here where type is storage accounts. This is the resource group under which I want to pull all the storage accounts from. I project the ID of that, and I put that into a context. Now, behave allows me to have a context that gets carried over from one step to the other step. So the first step, we've just ensured that we have the storage accounts that we need. The second step, which is the when step, we then filter the resources that match our criteria. So the criteria now here being that the storage account is in a given location. So that step over there is now passing that location of that test case into my test over here, and that pretty much just goes and ensures that we get the properties of the storage account using the Python SDK, and then I ensure that if the location meets the one that I'm looking for, then I kind of add that to my filtered list of resources. So once I've done that, then the verification kicks in. This is where we call the policy inside client using the SDK again, and I go and check whether for that particular policy, for that particular resource, whether the compliance state matches the one that I'm expecting, so that the expected value is what we have for that given policy. And I also ensure here that I had at least one resource in my test scenario that matches this requirement. And if that's not the case, then the test is going to fail. So this kind of allows your developer to ensure that they provide both positive, negative cases in terms of your feature file. So I could add as many conditions as I want over here, and it's pretty much just going to run all my tests in line with that. So that's pretty much from behave perspective. What I'll do now is I'll show you how easy that is to run my behave test for another scenario. So in this case, we did the scenario being the location. I could easily add another behave file where I'm checking whether storage account is not public facing. For that, I've gone ahead and created a policy where we check that the storage account of type storage account does not equal deny. So if the default action is not set to deny, in other words, this is public facing storage account, then my policy is going to deny the deployment. But because we do it with enforcement mode turned off, I'm able to deploy a non-compliant resource. So I'll quickly show you where that non-compliant resource comes in from. In my policies E2E, I have the infra code as well. And again, I'm using Terraform to do that. So I'm spinning up a couple of resources of type storage account. The first one being compliant. So in this case, I'm passing the location to be Australia Southeast. And in the second one, I'm passing the location to be West US. So I've created those two resources as part of that infra deployment step for E2E. So I could create more scenarios here for the ones where I've set the network rule default action to be allow or deny. I can then have a policy similar to this to check for this property value. So in my when step in my E2E, I would be, sorry, just give me a second. I would be checking for pretty much account dot network rule set, and that's basically of type network rule set. So it's pretty straightforward for me to now say rule set network rule set is equals to this, and rule set dot default action dot lower is equals to whatever action that I can pass in my step, right? So I might be passing allow over here. So I'll just make sure that that action that I pass in my when step is what the desired one is, right? So I could declare that, I could pass that through the step, and I would filter my resources to ensure that I've got storage accounts that I've deployed which match the criteria. And once that's done, then I could pretty much just in my then section, in the feature file, I could be passing the policy 4 over here. I'll pass the required compliance state. So this probably would become action, and this could become allow. If it is allow, if it is deny, then it is compliant. And if it is allow, then it should be. So by doing this, I've now ensured that before my controls are going to be deployed in environments where I have all the application teams deploying their controls, I'm fully aware about what the behavior of my control is, and I'm kind of fulfilling that. So just to quickly show you the pipeline in action, I'm not making any changes at the moment, but let's say, for instance, let's guard these changes. And if I just go and pull that block back in for my policy deployment, sorry. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm adding this thing here, and I'm saying that I want to just call it a name like storage. And I'll say the subfolder is 1. I'm now going to ensure that I deploy my policies for my storage account. So by doing this, I'm going to ensure, just commit that line of code. And I've pushed my code. I'll just show you the pipeline in action. So that's going to trigger a build. So that's the build that's kicked in. Added more controls. So that's doing as expected, all the steps. Quickly show you in the portal that the controls that we have is less than what functions type being custom. You can see I've got the platform controls and the platform policy set. And now I'm going to, this is where I do the Jinja conversion, create the JSON file. So these are the 2 folders, the platform and the storage that it's trying to now deploy. So you can see it's trying to add 6 controls here. And the reason is because it's adding 4 new controls for the storage. It's going to add 1 policy set, which is the initiative, and it's going to apply the assignment as well. So that's the 6th one. So those are the 6 controls, 6 new controls, new instances that we're going to see in our one. So if I start to refresh here, hopefully soon, we will now see that I'm deploying the storage controls as well. So that's pretty much it from my end. I think I've already run out of time, almost. I want to leave some time for questions.
Yeah,
I'm happy to take questions if there are any at this stage.
You have 15 more minutes actually, Atul.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, I can go deep into the script and show how the script works in Bash that I've written to.
From a bird's eye perspective, Atul, this pretty much what this does is you are effectively defining your policies, dynamically changeable policies inside a folder structure, and each folder effectively becomes an initiative, which then Terraform does the policy
Yeah.
set up initialization, isn't it? And then in terms of the testing, it actually creates a bunch of resources that are compliant as well as non-compliant, and it validates against each of those cases.
Yep.
Which is
Yeah.
an end-to-end case.
Yeah, that's right. You would have noticed over here right now that we had an error, and that's because of the way Azure's policy team has done the job. What happened there is that the policies were deployed. We have eventual consistency. When I'm trying to create the policy set and I'm providing it the policy definition ID, it can't find that policy definition. So we then run Terraform the second time to ensure that we are able to. I originally thought this was a Terraform issue, but this is a similar issue I now see in Bicep, which kind of tells me it's the underlying issue with the way Azure manages this. So once you run it the second time, then it's going to add the other two items, which is the policy set and the policy assignment. So that's pretty much something that they need to watch out for as well. It's quite consistent. Sorry, Venura, you were saying something before.
No, that's what I was heading as well, asking how it's more of a bird's eye view of how everything falls in place. That's what I was trying to explain. And it's good if you can have a look at the pipeline itself, just at least out of my curiosity, just to see how Java looks like, how it flows through.
Yeah, I think when you deploy, as I said, my background's from app dev. When you deploy something that's going to impact the whole platform, you want to make sure you've got your evidence collection, you've got your test coverage, you've run your automated tests as part of your pipeline. So that's one thing that I kind of feel not many people have been doing out there with policies. You generally tend to do some kind of a lot of them, they use the policy extension. I'll quickly just show that as well. I completely forgot about that. So with policy, all the fields that you have within your resources, they kind of map to an alias, and you use that alias to write a definition. So pretty much sky's the limit. You could write as many controls as you want, right? You could do exactly whether it's your cost management perspective or whether it is your security perspective. You could write a whole lot of controls against each individual property that you have within the resource. So that gives you that flexibility with the policy engine. But by doing that, you want to ensure that when you do this thing at platform wide, that you don't impact anyone's production workload. If they had a production change coming up and you've just done your deployment, now you're not going to be able to test their workload because that's not within your capacity and that's not your responsibility. So you want to make sure that you have full confidence in the controls that you deploy. Yeah. So if you see over here,
what happens if you deploy policy that's something and it breaks, or it's not something that's already deployed is not compliant with the policy? Is it going to then block that resource, or what's going to happen?
Yeah. So where one of the customers where we've done this, we kind of see this problem. We've had a control that didn't support the deny behavior before, but now it does. So you obviously want to make that enforcement come in, but because you have production workload, you kind of start sending comms out to the asset teams, to the application teams that look, this control, this is going to move into enforcement. So kind of give them so that they can ensure that they fix their workload for their non-compliance. So you just don't want to go and change that into a deny control, because you can do that now. You want to make sure that there is some kind of a communication that you have across the board. As I said, this is a platform level change, right? You don't know how many of them could get impacted. You could look at the policy dashboard and work out how many asset teams or applications are non-compliant as per that control in audit mode. So I kind of recommend going in audit mode first. But if it's a new service that within your environment people are going to start using, I would rather go with deny, which is enforcement from get-go.
So in your build pipeline, can you add some sort of step that does an audit first before it blocks something that's already deployed?
That's right. So that's what I did, right? Where I turned the enforcement mode off in my environment, right? Now, if by doing that, I'll quickly show you that in the portal. So if you look at the assignments here, right? I've got 2 assignments now because the other one has come in as well. But if you look at this assignment here, it's got a thing called enforcement mode, right? edit assignment. Parameters, basics.
Yeah, policy
Yeah. See this
enforcement.
policy enforcement?
Yeah.
You see, I've disabled that over here. And this is the
Yeah.
sole purpose so I can do my testing. So within your sandpit environment, you should probably do that anyways, just to make sure that you've run your test cases if you're going to automate them. But yeah, you could probably go with that. But this basically means that all the policies within your assignment, within your initiative, are going to be not enforced, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
You
would
can't
think,
really check in your build pipeline when you're running the pipeline to go, hey, is this going to break anything and stop your build at that point? Stop your
yes,
workflow at that point. You can't really do that yet, can you?
yeah.
You have to deploy the policy, then set it into disabled mode, then go check what's not in compliant to figure out.
No, I'm
If
doing
you,
that from the beginning, right? So in
yeah,
my Terraform module here, I've kind of explicitly called it out, right? I've said that this module, when I'm doing the assignment and I'm passing the enforcement mode. So right from the beginning, I'm creating the assignment with enforcement mode turned off for my dev
yeah,
environment,
yeah,
right? So you could do that as well. A lot of people use this but by doing that, as I said, right, with all the policies within your initiative will be in audit mode.
yeah,
So if you are going to have an assignment per policy, it's going to be a lot more resources that you're deploying, right? So you want to try and bundle your policies as much as possible for simplicity. So you can categorize them, if that makes sense, right?
I think from a practical scenario, what you said makes sense, because if it's an already established environment, it's hard to enforce things straight away. So you start with the audit mode, but then the moment you start adding those new service types or capabilities, that's where you go, okay, fine, we're going to block everything, or enforce things from not happening.
Yep. Yeah. Now, we've now deployed the E2E infra code here, right? I'll just quickly show you how Behave works under the hood. So I'll show you how I run my test cases from within VS Code. So I've set up my launch within VS Code setting to behave. So I'm going to execute the behave thing, and I've kind of specified what my current working directory is, which is the feature. I'm just going to run that here, and we'll just put a breakpoint in somewhere so that we can see what it's doing. So in this case, I'm going to put a breakpoint here. So you can fully debug your test cases on your own IDE if you wish to as well.
Atul, another question from someone, maybe just to show a little bit on the scripts that are running as well.
Sure, sure. Yep. Sorry. Okay. So for the policy deployment, what I'm doing is I'm getting the parameters that I've passed in, which is whether it's a plan or a destroy or whatever. I then get my account, which is pretty much calling Azure, because we've already logged in via the CLI. I'm able to use the commandlets within this to get my account. Let me just quickly show you that. So all I'm doing is the account show, because we've already logged in the step before, and I'm able to pull the subscription ID, tenant ID, user ID, whatever I need, right? So that's the next step that I do. Once that's done, then I kind of find my Terraform folder. I'll find the policy source, which is this, the control source within the policies folder, which is the controls folder where all the JSON files sit. I then run the configure the Terraform environment where I'm setting, the ARM client secret and all that, right? So all the exporting all the environment variables that I need, and then within the combined policies is where I do the transformation. So I'm kind of using Jinja transformation here to convert. So I pass it the template file, which is the J2 file. I pass it the environment file, which is the YAML, the dev.yaml or test.yaml. That gives me the new JSON file into a folder. So I've got all of that inside a generated folder. So that goes into the policies generated folder, and then pretty much run the Terraform. Terraform is then going to take that value. So when I finally run my Terraform, set the workspace, and then I run the Terraform code here, pass in the policy folder, which is pretty much all the folders. in the environment, so that it can then decide whether it needs to do enforcement, turned on, turned off, kind of thing. And that's the E2E deployment, pretty much the same thing, where I'm just ensuring that I call the right Terraform folder where I've got my E2E test cases, right? Now, the other thing that I would recommend is, as you can see, that this particular run that I'm doing, the compliance scan can take a long time. It can take up to 10 minutes. What I also recommend doing is, for each of the initiative, you kind of fan out your deployment of E2E infrastructure. And that allows you to kind of deploy all your scenarios as quick as possible, right? Compliance scan is still going to take around 10 to 15. That's the top. So you could have, a lot of services that you're adding controls against, but you can fan out the deployment of your infrastructure test cases into multiple stages. I think there was a conversation earlier on about stages, right?
Yes.
So that would help with that scenario as well. So you could run parallel stages for your E2E infrastructure, and then pretty much behave test is like, it runs super fast. So it's like milliseconds to run your test.
Yeah, it depends on how many agents you have at disposal. Also.
Yeah.
So makes sense. We are getting closer to the 7. We had extra 15 minutes if there are additional questions, but looking at the chat stream, we don't have a lot more questions. There was one comment from Vatsalya on that you could do resource-based policy. I think it was for the conversation between Phil and Atul.
Atul, Atul Pravini, I got a question. So how often will the Azure policy run a scan on the resources for compliance purpose?
Yeah, so I think that kicks in once every 24 hours, in my opinion, like the full scan.
Okay.
Other than that, whenever the resource is updated, right? So if a resource gets updated and it's an audit control, it's going to kick off the scan for that particular resource only. So the full environment scan happens once a day.
Okay.
From
It's not every 24 hours from my experience. It happens once a day, but sometimes it will happen soon as well.
Yeah, happens once a day, pretty much.
Once a day.
Yeah.
You can set the time as well, is it?
No, you can't. So that's all managed based on their load
okay.
behind the scenes, right? So they kind of orchestrate that.
Yeah, sometimes it happens within hours, depending on where you fit in the cycle. But sometimes it takes a bit. Maybe you have to come back and check the next day just to see the full coverage. Like if you set up Azure policy for the first time, it takes a day for you to start seeing proper information.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think we are now just hitting the mark where I'm hoping that this step would be completed. Yeah, that should be done within just under 10 minutes, in my opinion, based on recent experience, but it could take longer than that as well. But then you would see that the E2E test pretty much it's quick, pretty quick. Yeah. Any other questions that people have? I'm interested to know how people within their environment.
So the other comment that's been put in, something to also add with Azure policy is that it supports deploying resources as policy. For example, you could deploy audit settings to a central log analytics to all resources.
Sorry, what's that?
So does it make sense for you? So what Vatsalya is saying is something to also add with Azure policy is that it supports deploying resources as policy. He's referring to resource-based policy. Is that? I'm also.
Yeah.
No, sorry, just to add there. Essentially, you can deploy resources using, if you have a policy definition, your policy definition could say, I want all my resources to be audited to a central log analytics, or
yes,
and then you can use the deploy if not exist command. So instead of just being deny, you could also automatically remediate some of the requirements that some your security teams or your governance teams may have, and say all my logs need to go into a central log analytics group management central team, and that can be done by Azure policy as well.
Yeah, you could do a lot of deploy if not exist controls, and yes, one of them is your diagnostic settings, as I kind of mentioned, right? Yeah, you could do that as well. So you could do a lot of remediation alongside things like SQL. You know, you want to make sure that you've got the ATP deployed as well. If the application team hasn't done that, that might be a security requirement. So you could turn on ATP on your SQL instances as well. So a lot of deploy if not exist, but yeah, with that, what happens is, and that's the reason why I like to structure the policies in separate initiatives, because you want to follow the principle of least privilege. So you don't want to give all the controls within that initiative access to do things. It requires you to elevate the permission, right? So if you're going to have some controls that require some additional privilege, then you kind of put them in a separate initiative. That's pretty much it, guys. The pipeline succeeded. As you can see, that it ran the test, had one feature that passed, 2 scenarios that passed, 6 steps. That pretty much took that much time. It's the evaluation that takes more time.
Yeah, any more questions? Going once, going twice, gone. Okay. Atul, it was actually amazing what you did, what you showed us today, to be honest, because generally I've seen a lot of presentations where they focus on just the deployment, but your focus was not just deployment, but also trying to focus on the actual testing of it, the actual proving of that this works, which is something unique that we don't see in many people. So thank you for everything that you've presented today. And again, we'll hopefully see you again in another presentation soon.
Oh, man, thanks for having me here as well. And yeah, if there's any further questions, guys, feel free to reach out, or if there's anything that you would like to share, you know, I'm quite interested to always know how people do things within their own landscape as well.
Thanks, Atul. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
So yeah.
See you all.
That's right.